transforming this 1960s end table today. Start by sanding, gluing the veneer, scuff sanding the flat table, using the oven cleaner hack on the legs. I was very happy with what was hiding under all that stain. The entire table had to be glued back together. In the future, I plan to get a needle and syringe to get the glue into the cracks more seamlessly. I've made the mistake of not gluing down all the veneer and the pieces back together prior to sanding, and then when you sand, it really increases the chance that you will sand off the corners of the veneer and cause more damage that you have to fix later. Time to flip this over and unscrew the base. My plan is to take the whole thing apart and glue it all back together. This way I can know that it is stable and safe to put into somebody else's home. When sanding the thin veneer, I want to start with the 180 grit. If the 180 grit seems like it's working, I won't go any lower because I don't want to burn through the veneer. I'm using a hammer to tap the sides off. I had tried to sand it, as you can see, while it was all still attached, but it's really hard to get in the creases. The last two pieces didn't want to come apart, but that will be a lot easier to sand in now that it's detached from the rest of the table. Remember to sand in the direction of the grain. I love this wood grain pattern. Time to remove all the nails. Now you can flip it over and sand the other side. Still using 180 grit. I don't show it, but I keep using the 180 grit until all of the darkness is gone. You can still see that most of it remains. After all the darkness is gone, I will go back and use the 240 to finish it off. You can see though in the corner that I almost burned through the veneer, so be careful. Using 80 grit to sand the shiny top off. I'm sanding until it's no longer glossy, that way the bin shellac primer will have something to stick to. The back part needed a stronger 80 grit. The stain was being especially stubborn here. For this portion, you just want to clean off where you sanded and make sure when you move into the next grit that there's nothing left on there because it'll just dig into the finish. After 80 grit sanding, the finish appears dull. Top isn't wood, it's either acrylic or formica, something like that. When sanding over round edges, you'll want to make sure that you don't put too much pressure when you go over the round piece. You could burn right through the veneer if you put too much pressure on that round part. You'll want to sand these by hand with 180 grit. I'm trying to be patient and still use the 180 grit so that I do not burn through the veneer. To prevent those hammer dents, you can use a cloth between the hammer and the wood, or if you forget, you can use an iron to steam them out with the steam setting, and a towel barrier. I'm taking the base apart so that I can sand every nook and cranny and glue it back together in the joints, take out those little nails, and make it all look better. The writing on the tape ended up getting washed off through the process. Next time I will mark the end of the board there with permanent marker. Now that we have the nails out, we're going to move on to sanding the rest of the base with 80 grit, then 120 and 180, and I don't have any 220, so we're going to use 240. After sanding with just the 80 grit for I don't even know how long, forever, and it came clean, but I did not want to keep doing this over and over again with all the pieces, so I thought I would try something new, especially on these legs. It was not coming off. Since it's being so difficult, you can strip it with stripper. It's really messy. I'm going to try a hack I saw, Easy Off oven cleaner, and see how it goes. You'll need the Easy Off, the putty knife, paper towel, and a respirator. The respirator I'm using is rated for organic vapors. Showing you the warning sign on the can here and also how to angle it for application. After spraying it on, I let it sit for about 10 minutes. Couldn't see any effects right away, even after I sprayed it all on and scraped it off with the water. Like there was a lot of dark colorant left, so I let it dry overnight to really see what the effect of the oven off had. Later I found out that the dark color I was seeing even after the wood dried was actually the tannins in the oil being brought out by the oven cleaner. So be aware of this if you want to use the oven cleaner hack. But then I saw another guy, I'll post him below, that was talking about how I use lime away to get out the nail rust stains, and I was going to see if it worked on the tans as well. And I ended up actually being really happy with the results with the lime away, but I did not rinse it well enough, and it left a green tint that I later had to get rid of with oxalic acid. And I didn't have any of that, but I did have Barkeeper's Friend, so I used that, turned it into a paste. After I wiped it off, I let it dry, and then I went back and sanded some more. Quickwood is a 2-part epoxy you mix together. You break off the amount that you'll think you'll need. I'm going to use this to fill the nail holes and also to fill in any edges or gaps where I will be painting over. This is how the wood looked after I used the oxalic acid on it. I suggest using gloves when you're using the Quickwood. It is a little bit stinky, and it does suggest that when you sand it that you also wear a respirator. Your refinisher sand all the time, you need to overfill the surface. I've seen people use a putty on it, a putty knife, but I've been finding it kind of doesn't really. Actually, it's working a lot better than before. But since this fits into another piece, I want to make sure I straighten this out because it's gonna be really hard to get this in there with a sander later. So I'm gonna get into all the curves now. Push that out of the way. Using Tight Bond wood glue, I'm going to go and check every surface that got loosened. When I sanded, I swear I had to glue down more veneer. So I tried to keep up. These are actually just from the Dollar Tree, and they're for sewing. For the tabletop, I'll be using the Bin Shellac Base Primer. The water-based primer, but the shellac-based primer. This is me sanding after I applied the 1 coat of shellac-based primer. I'm vacuuming between strokes so that the sandpaper stays clean. You'll want to sand in one direction with a 220 grit. By sanding in between coats, you ensure a better, softer, smoother finish. After sanding, you can vacuum and use a tack cloth before you move on to your next coat. This is the first time I use Waverly chalk paint, and it's very affordable. It says to use glass cleaner to clean in between coats, so I did use this on the first layer that I put down after the base primer, after I sanded, after I vacuumed. Once your surface is clean, you can roll on your paint using your Dollar Tree paint roller. Now that I've done that, I'm taking this foam brush that's damp on the end and smoothing out any roller marks that I might see. Use full long brush strokes in one direction, slightly overlapping each other. You might notice the faint lines in the finish, but this does level itself out, as you'll see in the following pictures and when you sand in between coats. Using painter's tape, you're going to outline where you're going to paint. You'll want to press down on the tape as firm as possible to prevent any paint from leaking underneath. Double checking your straight lines to make sure you have a good finish. Since it's on a large area, I want to use this smaller paintbrush to have more control over how much paint I use. I've taped off the legs and made sure that those were pressed down as well. When the second coat of paint is still damp, pull off the tape so that you have smooth, crisp lines. There are the tabletops done as well. To sand in between coats, I use a sanding block and I use the 400. You can even cut out a piece of a brown paper bag to sand in between coats. I also use a tack cloth to clean between coats, also along with the vacuuming. Waverly says to wait 2 hours between coats. When I was painting, I got a little on the edge. I'm using my foam block and 80 grit sanding paper to get the paint off. The end is solid wood, it's not veneer. I kept finding new places to glue back together. Now it's time to put the table back together. You'll need a screwdriver for the legs and all the nails we kept in a nice little jam jar. Using a heat gun and wearing a respirator, I removed this piece that I added, and it was actually way too big for the space, so I had to redo it. After removing that piece, now I can actually put the table back together. I'm going to dry fit them now to make sure that they actually fit this time. Then I'll take my glue, run it around the inside parts, then use my paintbrush to spread it out. An extra set of hands would have made this much easier. The pieces fit perfectly together and it took a little bit of moving, but eventually I got them in the right spot. And next I'll show you the amount of clamps that it took to actually hold it together. The blue camps on each side are actually pushing the bottom table up into that crease so it's flush. Now using a hammer to finish putting in the brad nails all the way. I'm going to start putting the base back together one leg at a time by loosely fitting the screws, gluing in each part of the ends, the supporting bars, and then moving on to the next leg and going all the way around. I'm using the paintbrush to get full coverage on the inside of the bar where it goes into the leg. I'm only gluing after I dry fitted the entire base. This way I can ensure that I do not have to go back and fix my mistakes, which actually will still happen at this point. After it was glued, I went down and tightened all of the legs back down. I had one last piece to glue on the back. It was part of the tabletop, also for mica. And now I'm using Rustoleum chalk matte clear to finish off the sides, and it's water-based, so you can put it over the Waverly chalk paint, which is also water-based. This clear coat is going over the natural wood. I didn't use a stain. Go in one direction with the wood grain. You'll see it kind of has a foggy appearance to it. This does end up clearing up once it's dry, but if you have any bubbles, you want to make sure you pass over it and get those bubbles out before it dries. If you forget, you can sand them out. You'll just have to do another clear coat. Rustoleum suggests 1 to 2 coats. Always do about 2 coats, especially on pieces that are high traffic. You can use this paper bag to sand in between coats and get a very smooth finish. You'll still want to go in direction with the wood grain and on one direction when you're sanding the tabletop, even though it's painted. After sanding, I use a tack cloth to clean up all the dust before I will clear coat again. I'm laying this layer on really thick and then brushing and smoothing it out in long strokes. Keep in mind the thicker coat you have of Rustoleum will actually run the risk of more bubbles, and I did have to end up sanding that back after this dried because there were more bubbles than I expected. This is just a Dollar Tree brush. If you use a higher quality brush, it will help you have a better finish. I let it dry overnight and put it in sunlight to see if I've missed anything before listing it. This is a reminder of the before. And look at it now. I couldn't even believe it. I was really happy with how it turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. This sold after about a week on Marketplace. I'm happy that I left some of the original stain on the side. It's lightened up, but it still has its character.